Have you ever looked in a mirror and wondered if the person you see is really you? Not in a metaphorical sense, but with a chilling doubt, a feeling that something is not right. A piece has been removed from your life's puzzle that you can't find? For Elara, a successful architect, life seemed like a finished masterpiece. She had everything. A modern, minimalist house on a Malibu hill, where the afternoon sun sparkled on the Pacific Ocean. She had Julian, the husband she loved more than anything in the world. A financial investor with smart eyes and a warm smile that always soothed her worries. But walls built too perfectly often hide the deepest cracks. It all started in the most coincidental way, as fate often does. A new project. Not another luxurious house, but a strange contract. Renovating a decommissioned old asylum, miles from the coast, buried in ancient oak forests and shadows. A place where horror stories didn't need embellishment. St. Jude's Sanitarium. The old, rotting sign hung on the rusty iron gate, almost illegible. Elara had immediately refused. She liked light, transparency, open spaces. She didn't like darkness or secrets. But Julian gently persuaded her. A challenge, he said, his eyes sparkling. Create something beautiful from what is old and painful. His words had a strange power of persuasion. And so, Elara took the job, not knowing she was stepping into a labyrinth where the exit was the gateway to her own soul. The first days of working at St. Jude's were a strange walk through cold, peeling corridors and rooms where screams had been swallowed by time. Her every step on the creaking floorboards echoed with an invisible moan. She tried to keep herself busy with blueprints, measurements, trying to forget the heaviness of the air here. Then she found it. In an old storage room in the basement, where forgotten patient records were stacked in piles for decades. She was looking for an old blueprint to reference the structure. And as she moved a stuck shelf, a notebook fell out, dust flying up, and an old, faded photograph floated to the floor. A blurry black and white photo. A woman was staring at her, her eyes lifeless, her long hair falling over her shoulders. And Elara felt like she was looking into a mirror. The woman looked exactly like her. Not a general resemblance, but a replication down to the smallest detail. The structure of the cheekbones, the hazel eyes with a small, barely noticeable mole at the outer corner of the left eye, even the slightly crooked chin that Elara always hated. It was her. But it wasn't her. Elara felt her heart pound, an inexplicable panic rising. Who was this woman? Why did she look exactly like me? When was this photo from? Elara flipped the photo over, and on the back, in faded, scrawled handwriting, was a name and a date. Serafina. 1998. Elara remembered those years clearly. She had lived in a small house on a foggy coastal road, in a completely different life. She had memories, clear memories, but not a single memory of this place, or of another woman named Serafina. That night she couldn't sleep. Serafina's photo sat on the bedside table, the faint moonlight shining on the face that was so eerily similar to her own. Julian woke up, and he gently stroked her hair. "What's wrong, my love?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Elara pointed to the photo. "Do you see anything strange?" she asked. Julian looked at the photo, and the smile on his face suddenly vanished. A brief moment, a strange look. "She looks a little like you," he said, his voice wary. "I thought so too." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't a little like her. It was exactly the same. From that moment on, Elara's life was no longer a perfect picture. It became a horror movie with dark mysteries. She began to search for information about Serafina. She spent hours sifting through the rotten files at St. Jude's. She found Serafina's medical records, a thick file full of confusing notes from doctors. Paranoid delusions, partial amnesia, dissociative identity disorder. But what really made Elara shudder were the details within. Serafina had been brought here after a serious car accident. She was diagnosed with severe paranoia, and her paranoid ravings were all details about Elara's life. The house on the Malibu hill, the paintings Elara had painted, even the name of her husband, Julian. Couldn't be. How could a mental patient from 1998 know details about Elara's later life? Elara began to feel like she was being watched. She heard footsteps when she was alone at home, whispers in the wind, a faint moan echoing from the walls. Julian began to become irritable and restless. He always asked her about the project's progress, but not in the usual way. He always tried to direct her toward other tasks, things outside St. Jude's. "That's enough, my love," he said one night, his voice filled with a weariness Elara had never heard before. "I think you should give up this project. I'll find a way to end the contract." Elara was shocked. Why would he do that? Their relationship, which was a peaceful paradise, began to fall apart. Trust was eroded. Julian was hiding something. She felt he was trying to keep her away from St. Jude's, away from the truth. She became panicked, trusting no one. She lied to Julian, saying she had quit the project. But every day, she returned to St. Jude's, not to work but to search for answers. She needed to know who Serafina was, why she looked exactly like her, and why she knew her secrets. That night, Elara decided she had to do something she had never thought of. She needed to go back to St. Jude's, this time to find out everything. She took her keys, turned off the lights, and quietly left the house, leaving Julian sleeping alone on the cold bed. She was determined to find the truth, no matter the cost. Night at St. Jude's was something else entirely. It wasn't the gloom of daylight. It was a deadly silence, a place where every creak of a door, every whistle of the wind through broken windows could make your heart stop. Elara had returned, not with blueprints or a tape measure, but with a flashlight and an iron will. She had lied to Julian, and the guilt and fear clung to her like a cold mist. But the curiosity, the obsession with the woman in the photo who looked like her, had overcome everything. She had to know. This time she went deeper. She no longer just searched the storage room. She went into locked areas, where doctors and nurses used to live and work. The smell of oldness and must became overwhelming. In an old doctor's office, she found a locked cabinet, and after a few struggling minutes, she managed to open it. Inside were not documents, but a diary, the diary of a psychiatrist named Jonathan Reed. He was the one who had treated Serafina. The pages of the diary were filled with hurried, worried handwriting. Dr. Reed described Serafina not just as a patient, but as an unsolvable mystery. "She knows everything," he wrote. "Things she couldn't possibly know. She talks about another woman's life, her house, her job, her relationships. I thought it was paranoid delusion, but the details are too specific. It doesn't sound like a lie. It sounds like a stolen memory." Elara felt her legs tremble. She flipped the page. An entry dated May 12, 1998, a day after she was admitted. She constantly screams her husband's name. She calls him Julian. Elara's hands began to shake. Julian. That name appeared in Serafina's file, a mental patient who had been confined for decades, and he was her husband. That coincidence was impossible. And then a terrible truth began to emerge. A truth she had tried to hide from herself. Her memories. Elara had had gaps in her memory since before she met Julian. She always thought it was just psychological trauma from a car accident she had experienced when she was young. Julian had always reassured her that everything was fine. He said she met him after the accident, and he helped her through it. He gave her a new life, a better life. But now she began to wonder, did he give her a new life, or a different life? A fake life? She flipped to the last pages of the diary. Dr. Reed was panicking. "I was wrong," he wrote. "I trusted him. He said it was a new treatment, a memory therapy, that she needed to forget her painful past to move on. But no, he took her memories not to save her, but to use them, to fill a void." Elara read the final lines, the handwriting full of despair. "She is not Serafina. Serafina is gone. She is someone else. What did he do to her? What did he do to her?" After that, the diary pages were just senseless scribbles and doodles. Elara felt like an electric current was running through her. The fear had turned into something colder, a terrible disgust. She ran out of the office. She needed to get out of this terrifying place. She ran through the dark corridor, her flashlight beam swinging on the walls, and then she heard a sound. Footsteps. Not hers. Another set of footsteps. Slow, steady, getting closer. She turned off the flashlight. Hid in an empty room. The door opened, and a figure stepped in. It was Julian. His face no longer held the usual warm smile. It was a cold, cruel expression that Elara had never seen. "I knew you'd come back," he said, his voice full of disappointment. "I had hoped you would listen to me, that you would let the past rest." Elara felt like she was standing in front of a stranger. This man was not the husband she had loved. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I found Dr. Reed's diary." Julian just sighed. "Elara," he said, "the woman in that photo is you. You are Serafina. Serafina is Elara. But she is the Elara of the past. You are a better version. A version created after everything fell apart." Those words were like a punch to Elara. She felt everything spinning. She wasn't her? Her life was a lie? Who was she? Julian continued. "You went through a terrible accident. You lost your memory. You were brought here. Dr. Reed believed he could help you. But I offered a better solution. An artificial solution. I took your painful memories and replaced them with a new life. A life without tragedy. A life with me." Elara looked at him, tears beginning to flow. "But Serafina, that woman, where is she?" she asked. Julian moved closer. "She no longer exists," he said. "She's dead." But then Elara heard another sound. Not from Julian. Footsteps closer, clearer. From behind Julian. She looked over his shoulder and she saw a figure. A figure that looked exactly like her. That woman's eyes were not like hers. They were filled with rage, madness, and an unspeakable pain. She had escaped from here long ago. She had been waiting to take revenge, waiting to reclaim her life. "Julian," the woman said, her voice filled with a chilling coldness. "You lied to her. You lied to everyone. Serafina never died. She was just replaced. And you made a mistake." Julian turned around. Elara saw a look of horror she had never seen on her husband's face. Things had gone too far. And their story was no longer a mystery. It had become a game of survival. Night at St. Jude's was no longer a stroll. It was a battlefield. Elara stood there, between two people. Julian, who created her, and the woman who was her exact twin, whose life Julian had stolen. Elara felt like a puppet whose strings were being pulled, and she didn't know who to trust or whose side to take. The other woman stepped out of the shadows. The scar on her forehead was part of the tragic story. It was exactly like the small scar Elara also had. "My name is Serafina," the woman said. "I am the Elara he stole." Those words made Elara feel like she was being torn in two. She looked at Julian, begging for an explanation, but he just looked at her with a cold gaze. "She's crazy," Julian said, his voice full of contempt. "Don't believe her, Elara. I protected you. I gave you a new life." But Serafina laughed, a bitter laugh. "You took everything from me," she said. "My marriage, my home, my identity, and my child." Those words stunned Elara. A child? She had never had a child. Julian had always said he didn't want children until they were both established in their careers. But Serafina mentioned a child. A hidden tragedy. Serafina began to tell her story, and Elara felt everything about her life collapsing like a sandcastle. Serafina and Julian had been married for a long time. They had a little daughter named Lyra. Their life was a happy picture. But then one night, a car accident happened. A truck lost control, a terrible collision, and Serafina woke up in a mental hospital with her daughter missing. Julian had orchestrated it all. He was not a normal financial investor. He was the head of a secret organization specializing in cognitive alteration and memory erasure. After the accident, Serafina was seriously physically and mentally injured. Julian saw it as an opportunity. He created a new version of Elara, an Elara without a painful past, a perfect Elara, the Elara he wanted. As for Serafina, she was held captive here, with terrifying memories of Lyra and Julian's betrayal. She was given constant medication to blur her memories and sanity. but she had managed to escape. "I'm going to take everything back," Serafina said, her eyes burning with hatred. "My life, and my child." Elara looked at Julian. He had deceived her, turning her into a stand-in. Their love was not real. It was a sophisticated deception. Pain and rage welled up in Elara. She turned to Serafina, tears streaming down her face. "Where is Lyra?" she asked. Julian laughed cruelly. "Lyra is dead," he said. "The child died in the accident. That's why Serafina could never accept the truth. It's a memory too painful." Serafina suddenly lunged at Julian. A terrible confrontation broke out. Julian was not a normal person. He had been trained. He quickly overpowered Serafina. Elara stood there, paralyzed. What should she do? Help the man she had loved, who created her, or help the woman who was her exact copy, who he had destroyed? Julian picked up a piece of broken glass and threatened Serafina. Elara knew she couldn't stand by. She picked up a heavy chair and threw it at Julian. He lost his balance, and Serafina took the opportunity to quickly run outside. Julian turned to Elara, his eyes full of betrayal. "Why?" he asked. "I gave you everything." Elara felt an unspeakable pain. "You gave me a fake life," she said. "You took away the truth. That's not a gift. It's a curse." Julian began to chase Serafina, and Elara knew she had to do something. She couldn't let him catch Serafina again. She ran after them, out into the dark oak forest. The chase ended at a cliff. The faint moonlight illuminated the two women who looked exactly alike, confronting the man who had deceived them. "We can start over," Julian said to Elara, his voice softening, trying to persuade her. "Forget everything you've heard. Forget her." Elara looked at Serafina, at the woman who had suffered it all, and she knew what she had to do. "No," Elara said. "The truth cannot be forgotten." Julian lunged at Elara, but Serafina quickly pushed him away. Julian lost his balance and fell down the cliff. Both women stood there, looking into the endless void. A terrible silence hung in the air. "He's dead," Elara whispered. Serafina said nothing. She turned to look at Elara, and Elara saw a different look, a look no longer of hatred, but of emptiness. Serafina turned back, beginning to walk toward the forest. "He said the child was dead," Elara called after her. "Is that true?" Serafina stopped. She turned her head. "Julian always lied," she said. "I don't know." And then she disappeared into the darkness, leaving Elara alone standing on the cliff. Elara didn't know who she was anymore. She had killed the man she had loved. She had helped the woman who was her exact twin. But was she really a good person? And did that child, Lyra, really exist? It all remained an open question, a haunting ghost. Dawn came, and with it a completely different world. Elara returned to her house on the Malibu hill, but it no longer felt like home. It was just an empty tomb of a fake life. The police came, questioned her, but there was no evidence of Julian. He had disappeared. The abyss had swallowed him, and with him, the entire secret of the organization he had created. Elara told them everything, but who would believe such an insane story? Her life continued, but she was no longer the Elara of yesterday. She knew the truth. She knew who she was. She was Serafina, and she had to live with a part of her life stolen, forgotten. She sold the house on the hill, unable to bear living in a place full of lies. She used the money to start a foundation for patients with personality disorders and amnesia. She searched for information about Lyra. She tried everything to find her daughter, the child she only knew from stories. A year passed, and Elara returned to St. Jude's. It had been renovated, becoming a psychological research institute. But as she walked through the corridors, she still felt the coldness of the past. She went to Dr. Reed's office, where she had found his diary. The place was still empty, but this time, on the desk, there was an envelope with no sender's name, but she knew who had sent it. Inside was a photo, a black and white photo. It was Serafina and a little girl. The little girl was smiling, her eyes sparkling. On the back of the photo was a small handwritten note. "She is in a safe place. Please forgive me." Elara didn't know who sent that photo. Was it Serafina? Or was it someone else who knew the secret? She had found a little hope, a little peace. Her daughter, Lyra, was still alive. Although she didn't know where the child was, she knew that a part of her, a part of Serafina, was living a different life, a free life. Elara decided to stop searching. She realized that life is not about finding the past, but about living with it, learning to accept it. She was no longer Julian's Elara. She was also no longer the tormented Serafina. She was a combination of both, a woman who had gone through tragedy and survived. She had to live with the truth that she had killed the man she had loved. She had to accept that she had lost her past. But she had not lost herself. She had found it, in the darkness of an old sanitarium and in the forgiveness of a person she never truly knew. And as she walked out of the building, turning her back on the past, she saw herself walking toward the light. She had overcome the darkness. She had survived. She had found the truth. This story is about truth, about secrets, about pain and loss. But above all, it's about finding yourself. Sometimes, to find yourself, you have to lose everything. You have to face the ghosts of your past, the women who look exactly like you, who know your secrets. And you have to learn to accept that life is not always a fairy tale. If this story has made you think, if it has made you curious about the secrets your life might be hiding, leave a comment below and let us know what you think. And don't forget to like if you enjoyed this content, subscribe to the channel to not miss other fascinating stories, and turn on notifications to be the first to know when we have a new video. Thank you for listening.